Okay, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I wish all of you salam and thank you for joining us today. This is our 18th day of discussion, and we're going to talk about the 19th surah of Qur'an, which is Maryam. And Maryam is the Arabic word or Arabic name for Mary, the mother of Jesus. So Simi is going to talk about part of the surah, and I'm going to talk about, I'll basically give an overview, and I'll share with you the general themes that appear in this surah and the conclusions that are drawn as part of the discussion. And Simi is going to talk about one particular passage in detail, the passage where the birth of Jesus is depicted and what kind of an experience Mary goes through on the occasion. So the surah begins, the first 15 ayat talk about Zechariah and John. Zechariah asks God for offspring. He's old and he asks God for offspring, and then angels give him the good news of John. And John is described as a person who is blessed, a person who is given kindness and who is gentle to his parents, and a leader and a nabi, a prophet. And by the way, when Quran calls him a leader, the word used there is Sayyid, and this is a name that a lot of Muslims take, including myself. So Quran describes John as Sayyid, or a leader of community. And there is a miraculous element to the birth of John, because Zechariah himself, even though he asked God to bless him with offspring, he was himself surprised when the angels brought him the news of John, that he thought he was very old and his wife was very old, and how could they possibly conceive? And at that point, the angels say something. The angel says something very interesting. He responds when Zechariah expresses surprise that he will have a son soon. The angel responds, "Kadhalika qala rabbuk." This is what your Rabb has said. Huwa alayya hayyin. This is a small deal for me. This is really not a big deal. So what we see here is, in both the birth of John and the birth of Jesus, we see a miraculous dimension and God's creative ability at work. So from 16 to 40 is the account of Mary, as she is given the news of Jesus, and she's surprised that no man has ever touched her, and how come she's going to bear a child. And again, the angels respond with the same thing. كَذَلِكِ قَالَ رَبُّكَ هُوَ عَلَيَّ هَيِّنٌ. This is what your Rabb says. This is a small deal for me. So God's creative power at work. And now this passage, the depiction, and this passage basically depicts what kind of experiences Mary goes through when she's about to give birth to Jesus. And Simi is going to talk about that shortly. So yeah, I think you can go ahead first, because then I'll proceed with the rest of the surah and the conclusion of this passage.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do I have a timer or something here?
Timer is right here.
I haven't met you before. What's your name?
Sue.
Sue? Welcome, Sue. And how do you come to be with us today?
Invitation.
Invitation?
Marmi is taking care of the ministry at St. Andrew's Hall.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Beautiful. Thank you. Welcome. Okay, so I have passed out a sheet, and does everybody have one? Yeah? You all have one? Would you like to have one? No? Okay. So you should know that you can get up, move around, wiggle, do whatever you need to do, okay? If just sitting there gets tiring for you, don't worry about that. Okay, so what I'd like to do is start by looking at this passage. And this is really one of my favorite passages in the Qur'an. I have a lot of personal connections to this passage, and okay. So this account, it basically is the account of the birth of Isa, the birth of Jesus in the Quran. And the birth of Jesus in the Quran is quite distinct and quite different from the birth of Jesus in Christian tradition, in Christian scripture, and then much elaborated in Christian tradition. And that's kind of a story that we all know from Christmas cards, Christmas carols, you know, and it's got there's a manger and a star and 3 wise men and a little drummer boy, and it's a very beautiful and culturally formative story. But this is really quite distinct. And a couple of things are very powerful about this story in the Quran. One is that really you hear Mary's voice speaking in labor. And that's an unusual thing anyway in women's, in literature, to find kind of that experience represented. The experience of a woman giving birth is a very rare thing, and then to find it in this text, and it's so direct and it's so powerful and it's so colloquial. Now the figure of Mary is a figure that, you know, there's immense, like very rich, beautiful Mariology in Christianity, and sometimes Mary is very much the Queen of Heaven. Is a figure who's revered, who's saintly, and who's removed from real life. And so this is very interesting for that reason, as Muslims also with many of our holy figures have done, like removing them from real life. So, so let's just take a look at this. So Mary, first of all, she was very young. Maybe she's 15. She's close to your age, the age of you older ones there, when this occurs. She came from a noble family, and when she was, when her mother was pregnant, she decided that she wanted to devote her to the temple. She wanted to dedicate her child to the temple. She did not realize she would have a girl, and girls were not dedicated to the temple. So when Mary was born, her mother said, still, I'm going to do this. So Mary was actually, she came from a priestly family. This passage calls her the daughter of Harun, or the sister of Harun. So Aaron was Moses' brother, and the children of Aaron, that was a long lineage of holy men and priests, and she was a child who came from this very exalted spiritual lineage. And then, on top of that, she was devoted to the temple in Jerusalem, and she was raised within, it seems, in the Quran they say that she was raised within the mihrab. The mihrab, you know, in a mosque, the mihrab looks something like this, and it's where the imam stands, and it tells you the direction to pray. So the mihrab is like this, and it's a niche. It's carved out. But literally, mihrab is related to the word harb. Does anyone know what is harb? Harb. Harb. It means the place of harb, and harb is battle. So why would the most sacred, innermost part of a temple be called the place of battle? What do you battle when you're on retreat or when you're in meditation? Then what are you battling? Pardon? Yes, your nafs, your ego, yourself, right? So she was actually raised within this mihrab, And her guardian was Zachariah. Zachariah was her uncle. He was chosen to be her guardian, and he was her spiritual teacher. He was like her guide, her guru. He was the one who was leading her on the path. And they say that whenever he came and he saw Mary in the chamber, this little girl, he would find that she had rizq. She had provisions, she had fruit, she had food, she had everything she needed. And he would say, Mary, where does this come from? He was her guardian, but he hadn't given this to her. And she would say that this is from Allah, and Allah gives rizq. He gives provision to whomsoever He wishes. This is really important. Min ghayri hisab. Min ghayri hisab means hisab is measure or accounting. So min ghayri hisab is without measure, limitless. Without measure and limitless. So she was raised in a realm where what she was receiving was not in the realm of quantity. It was what we say, it's in the realm of quality, right? She was receiving grace in the realm of quality, and she had a very powerful spiritual gift. So let's read this passage and see what happens. Okay, so it says, and mention, where's my time? I want to make sure that I'm
7 minutes.
Okay, so it's and mention in the book, in the kitab. We've been talking about kitab, right? And kitab is like all the divine writ that has come down over time to humanity. It's this kitab. It's the kitab of the human self, the kitab of the heart. So mention or remember in the book Mary when she withdrew from her people to a place in the east. And they say that this place where she withdrew, she probably withdrew for meditation. It might have been the easternmost part of the temple. The innermost sanctuary of the temple was in the eastern part of the temple. So it might have been there, or it might have been a place in the east outside outside Jerusalem somewhere. So, and secluded herself from them. Or she drew a veil around herself. Was it a physical veil, a spiritual veil, And we sent to her our ruh, our spirit, which tradition identifies with the angel Gabriel. That we sent Gabriel to her, just like you had asked, are there women that are prophets? So Mary is a woman, and she receives a message she sees this angel, she sees this spirit, just like the prophets do. We sent our ruh, and it appeared to her exactly like a beautifully proportioned human being, or it appeared exactly like a man. And she said, A'udhu bir-Rahman, I seek refuge in the Rahman from you. If you are conscientious, if you have taqwa, right? We said taqwa is consciousness and awareness. So what's happened here? She's gone out somewhere. She's by herself. She's this young girl. She's been so protected. And all of a sudden, this man appears. And what happened? Why did she seek refuge? For any of us, I think this is like a very powerful moment, because if I'm alone somewhere and suddenly some guy is there, I'm going to be scared, right? It's a really profound, experience which mostly women experience. That we can't just be out somewhere on our own in the wilderness or in the concrete jungle if we live in a big city, and somebody appears. There's just this part of you that says, "Uh-oh, am I safe or am I not safe?" You're trying to think, what's my exit? So it's this is such a real moment. And what she says is not A'udhu Billah, which is what we normally say, I seek refuge in Allah. She specifically says A'udhu Bir-Rahman, I seek refuge in the Rahman. We said Rahman is the name of Allah that has Rahm, that has womb in it. And it's the Allah that creates. It's the creative compassion that creates and sustains the universe. So I take refuge from you in the Rahman if you have taqwa, if you have awe and love of God, if you are aware. And he said, I am only a messenger from your Lord. Don't worry. I'm just a messenger from your Lord, from your Rabb, to give you a pure child, a pure son. And now here she is, she's 15, she's been raised in the temple by her uncle. It's, you know, as sheltered and as protected and as enclosed a life as you could possibly have, right? She's never watched a music video, she's never watched a sitcom, there's no, right, she's not gone to a co-ed school, and she says, well, how can I have a son when I don't have a partner, I don't have a husband, no one's ever touched me, and I'm not a woman who's unchaste, I'm a virtuous woman. So for her, and in that society, for a girl like her, being so young and then coming from this exalted spiritual lineage, this would have been the greatest shame possible. A shame so deep that she would, you know, death would be preferable even, right? There was, so she's completely shocked. How can I have a son? And he said, it will be so. Just like that. And he said, your Rabb says, just what Faisal told us, Qala, kadhaliki, it's easy for me. وَهُوَ عَلَيَّ حَيِّنٌ. It's easy. It's not a big deal for me. That's what your Lord says. And we intend to make him a sign for humanity. And the word here for sign, an ayah. We talked about the ayat of God. We've been talking about that. So Jesus is an ayah. The ayat are not just the signs in the Qur'an. The ayat are the signs in the prophets. And by extension, the ayat in all of humanity. Every human being is an ayah, is a sign. We intend to make him a sign and a mercy and a rahmah from us. So again, this root, rahm, is coming up for the second time. And that's really important because what's about to happen to Mary, or what just happened, she's pregnant. Her own rahm, her own womb has a child in it. And then she seeks refuge in the divine. What part of the divine, that aspect of the divine that's like the womb. So the matter is decided. That's it. This is destined. And so she carried him. She bore the child, secluding herself with him in a faraway place. In a faraway place. And, or, you know, it's like a wild place, a distant place, a wild place. So there's nobody with her. She's by herself. She's 15 or 16. And then what happens? She has to give birth to this baby. And she starts to feel the pain of labor. And one of the things that we know about women in labor is that they need other people with them. They need people to support them, to give them water, to give them courage. Traditionally, women had midwives with them. They had doulas with them. They had their sisters, their mothers, people who had been through this journey of bringing a child into the world and could hold them and love them and support them. And even elephants are like this. I'm going to tell you a little story about elephants, that there was a zoo and they had the first elephant ever was giving birth in this zoo, and she was having a really hard time. She was struggling and nothing was happening, and so then they called another zoo where they had a long experience of elephants giving birth, and they said, you know, we're having trouble and what should we do? And they tried to like show the video of and they said, well, where is she now? And they said, well, you know, we've kept her separate, we've given her a nice pen, she's got lots of space, and they said, well, where are the doulas? Where are the midwives? And doulas are women who are with women who give birth, and they help to take care of them in the process. They don't do the medical part, but they support them, right? And they said, what do you mean? And they said, well, where are the other female elephants? And they said, well, you know, we've kept them all separately. So, and they said, well, let them in right away. And so they let the female elephants in, the older ones, and they started stroking this elephant with their trunks. And they, you know, elephants make these amazing rumbling sounds with their bellies, and they can communicate over miles and miles. Very sophisticated communication through this like stomach rumbling. So they were making this stomach rumbling and lowing, and the baby, the mother, she calmed down and she gave birth. So Maryam doesn't have any of this. She's 16 and she's alone, and she's in this faraway place. And what happens? The laborers take her to the trunk of a palm tree. And there are many beautiful images. Again, you can look on the internet and find many beautiful Islamic miniatures of Maryam under this palm tree. And I was doing this story with a group of Christian and Jewish women in an interfaith context, and one of them was actually a midwife herself, and we got to this thing about the palm tree. She said, oh, that's the doula, that's the midwife, and that's the one she leans on, this palm tree. She leans on the palm tree, and right before she gives birth, the pain is so extreme, she says, I wish that I were dead. I wish I had died before experiencing this and had been completely forgotten. It says in the Qur'an, Nesyan Mansiya. So this is forgetting again. We've talked about forgetting being a theme, right? So this, and that the word for human being, even insan, you can see that insan sounds like Nesyan Mansiya. It's the same root. So it means several things. It means I wish that I was forgotten, that the whole world forgot I even existed, like there was not even a memory of me. It means I wish that I was the place of forgetting, that my body were the place where forgetting happens. And it also means I wish that I could forget. So I wish that I could not remember. I wish I were unremembered, and I wish that my body were the place of unremembrance. And this also is a very profound moment. There is a moment in birth, and they call it sometimes the ring of fire. And a woman has to go to that place before a child can be born. Actually, when I gave birth to Aliyah, there was this moment where I remember that I screamed, I'm dying. And I really believed I was dying. And there was a voice I heard. I didn't know whose voice it was, but the voice said, well, if you have walked through the door of death, then you are ready to have this child, because no woman can give birth without walking through the door of death and returning. And that's a very theoretical thing for someone to say when you're in pain, but you know, it made a difference. And then I had her, and later on I discovered it was Jackie, who was my doula, who was the one that had said that at that point. But at the time I didn't know. It was like a voice that came from somewhere. So she says this, I wish I had died. And then it says, and then he called to her from below. We don't know exactly who called to her from below. But a voice called to her from below her, and it said, do not grieve. Your Lord has placed a stream beneath you. And we saw how there was the coming together of the two oceans yesterday, and those waters are a symbol of divine compassion and divine knowledge. Water is the water of life. So this water of life, there's a stream beneath you, and shake the trunk of the palm tree towards you, and let the fresh, ripe dates come down, right? And dates are incredibly nourishing. They're like a complete food. So she's going through a transition here. When she was young and she was in the sanctuary, everything was provided for her. Even Zechariah didn't have to bring anything. Like, she could just meditate, and she had risks like beyond measure. And now she's going through a transition, and she has to work and shake that trunk to get her food. And when we talked about Allah's Rahman and Allah's Rahim, and Rahman, it's like the sun, it just comes for you, everybody gets it, doesn't matter what you do, but Rahim is like you have a lamp and you put the oil in it and you light it and you kindle it and then you keep it clean. That's how Allah's Rahim. In a responsive relationship with your action, He gives to you as Rahim. And Rahman is just because He's the overflowing creator. He creates you and keeps the whole universe running without your having to do anything, right? So when she was in that mihrab, it was like she was under the domain of Rahman. Everything came to her. And she was innocent and she didn't have to do anything. But once she is going through this transition to become a mother, she has to shake the tree. She has to do something. And then she gets this. But all of these things, there's the tree. This is all exactly what one of those female companions would do. And she doesn't have that female companion. So what does Allah send her? He sends her something in nature. And even if you go to the Dome of the Rock, the mosque in Jerusalem, this palm tree is there in the decoration. This palm tree of Maryam is in the decorations there. So it's a very powerful symbol in Islamic art. And it says, and then eat and drink and cool your eyes, or be of rejoice. But if you see any man, if you see any human being, say, I have dedicated a fast to Rahman. Okay, I've dedicated a fast. I'm fasting for the Rahman, so I shall not speak to any human being today. So just like many of us are fasting now, she's told to fast, but not from food and drink. She's told to fast from speaking. There's a fasting from speaking. She's told to remain silent. And why is she told to remain silent? Is there anything she can say? There's really nothing she can say to defend herself, right? She's just like Yusuf in that situation. Nothing Yusuf was going to say was going to make a difference, because the person who had accused him was much more powerful. She was a queen. He was a servant. There was nothing. Allah had to send the intervention. And it's the same way. She's told to fast because really, what can she say? Like, she has a baby and she's not married, and she comes from a culture where this is extremely shameful. She doesn't understand what's happened. She's been through all of this alone. There's nothing she can say. So this is what she said to say. Say that I have taken a fast to the Rahman. Okay, and again you see Rahman is the name of God that keeps coming up here as Rahman. There's so many, there are 99 names of God and even more than that. But it's Rahman because that is the name of God that has womb in it, and that's the whole theme here, is this creation. So finally she carried him to her people, and they said, Mary, you have done an amazing thing, an unheard of thing, a shameful thing. We've never seen something like this in our life, that a girl dedicated to the temple from this family should come with this baby out of wedlock. And they said, sister of Aaron. So they're reminding her where she comes from. Like, you are the granddaughter of a prophet, of Aaron. Your father was not a bad person, and your mother was not unchaste. Right? Your mother was not a bad woman. And now she pointed to him. So what did she do? All she could do, there was nothing. What is she supposed to say? She can't say anything. She's completely up against a wall. Right? And so she points to the child, and they say, how can we talk to a baby in the cradle? Right? They're skeptical. Like, what's this baby going to... And then what happens? The baby speaks. This baby Isa speaks, and he said, I am indeed the servant of God, who has given me kitab and made me a prophet and made me blessed wherever I am. This is so important for them. This baby is a curse. This baby is a baby that has come out of sin and wrongdoing. But he says, no, I'm not cursed. I'm blessed. Wherever I am blessed. And he has prescribed prayer, salat, and charity for me as long as I live. It's just like the beginning of the Qur'an said, those who establish worship and give charity. And I said, it's not just money, it's whatever you do. If you're teaching, if you're caring for someone, he has prescribed this for me, and kindness to my mother as well. Right? And we saw a couple of days ago we've seen 2 times that after faith in Allah, faith in one God, the next commandment is goodness to the parents. So even Jesus, who, as we know from, was the gentlest of beings, Allah commanded to him kindness to his mother, and he did not make me arrogant or malcontent, somebody who's always unhappy with everything and complaining about everything and being rough with everyone. No. And he said, and salamun alayya. So what do we say when we greet each other? We say, assalamu alayka, peace be upon you, or assalamu alaykum, peace be upon you. So he gives himself greetings of peace. He says, assalamu alayya, peace is upon me, the day that I was born, and the day that I die, and the day that I'm raised, resurrected, alive. So that's the story. I think I've tried to point out as we were going along. I'm doing now. It's 07. Okay. That there are certain themes that are similar with things that we've seen before. One is this being enfolded or enclosed, and then being out in the open, like the people of the cave. They were in retreat. Maryam's in retreat, and then on the other hand, there was the king, Dhul Qarnayn, who ruled over a vast kingdom. There's a sense of expanse there, and she is both in the mihrab, and then she's also out in the wilderness. There's a theme of birth and death, and the way that birth and death are intertwined. Right? She wishes she were dead, but then she gives birth. Then she brings life. Jesus is blessed the day he dies, and then he's blessed the day he's born, and then he's resurrected, right? So there's this theme of innocence, and that moment when you can't establish your innocence, and you have to take a fast of silence, essentially, and wait for the Rahman, for the gracious one, to exonerate you. This is not just something that happens to prophets and people in the Quran. This is a human experience that we all have to know. What is the moment where you stop arguing for yourself and just be at peace with things? But in particular, there's this really real experience of deep human pain here, and it's the pain of a woman in this very profound moment, and you hear her voice actually speak and cry out in this text, whereas that is usually a very private moment, heard only by the woman herself and the people who are with her. So if you look at, there's a beautiful royal baby, and they go into the hospital from the back, and they come out, and she's wearing a lovely polka dot blue dress, and her, Princess Diana's engagement ring, and they're smiling, but what happened there is invisible. It's completely invisible. And it is extremely profound that this invisibility is made visible in the Quran. So one thing that this text, when women are ready to give birth and their labor starts, or if they're overdue and they want their labor to start, then women in the Muslim world will recite this. So if a woman is going into labor, she reads Surah Maryam, and her sisters and her cousins and her friends and her aunts read Surah Maryam. And so like both the times when I was having my children, from the beginning until the end, until the babies were born, which the first time was 40 hours, and the second time was 4 hours. But for 40 hours, my mother read this. She would read it, and she would walk up to me, and she'd blow it, and she'd go sit down again and read it. So Muslim women have a very profound relationship with this surah, because if they practice this, then every time, like we read it thousands of times, every time our cousin or our sister or anyone, in the old days people would telephone, and now like you get texts, or you get something in your Facebook inbox that someone's gone into labor. If I know that someone's pregnant, I always say to them, please let me know right when you start your labor, because any woman I know from any tradition, Muslim, not Muslim, I always try to read this for them to have that the last thing I want to say is there's something very interesting. There's well, I'll just read you. It's like one paragraph. There's this root, and it's called Panjay Maryam. It's called the Fist of Maryam. And I'm just going to read you a little bit about this. This is from a piece that I wrote. So it says, there's a root that grows in the hills outside of Medina. And the Bedouin Arab women harvest small bunches of it, and they bring it to the graveyards of the Muslim martyrs. My mother remembers this from her Indian childhood. The Hajj pilgrims would return from Makkah on big wooden ships, disembarking to garlands of marigolds, jasmine, and rose. And in return, they offered their loved ones vials of healing Zamzam water and bunches of the root known as Panjay Maryam, Mary's hand or Mary's fist. Panj means 5, so that's why it's Panja, because it's the 5. And they say that this same root used to grow in the hills near Bethlehem, and that Maryam grasped it when she was overcome by birth pangs. Ammi's aunts used to soak it in a bowl of water until it was soft, and grasped it in their own labors, calling upon Hazrat Maryam to stand by them in their pain. So it's like they feel that they're holding her hand. My sister Saba had bought 2 fists of Mary at the graveyard of Badr near Medina when she was 12 years old and I was 17. And since then, they had accompanied her to Chicago, New York, and North Carolina. She used one root for the birth of her children, and the other she saved for me. She told me how she had watched this fist unfold in her first labor, gradually tinting the water a delicate amber color. And I too witnessed those deepening hues and held the root in my hand, folding Maryam's strength within mine and sending salams to her spirit. 2 days and nights had passed striving to give birth. Oh, I'm going to get emotional. Wow. Okay. To her, to Aliyah. Night had come once again before she was finally born. It was December 19th, 1999, the 11th night of Ramadan, 2 hours before yet another midnight. And as the postpartum nurses settled our daughter to rest, I turned to the glass bowl at my bedside and glanced at the fist of Mary, still floating, carnelian in color and serene. Once gnarled, desiccated, and closed, it had slowly unfolded and softened in the animating medium of water. The fist had become a pliant hand, and now after 48 hours, it revealed something that no one had intimated to me was possible. This root of Maryam had traveled from its ancient home to my daughter's land and become a tentative garden. On this, our last Layla, our last night together, Maryam's palm opened, offering green leaf and blossom. So, you know, these desert plants, they don't get much water at all. So when they do, what happens is they actually bloom very quickly. So my sister, you know, had her children in the United States. Nobody would ever have let her go 40 hours in labor. So she, you know, had C-sections, but so she had seen this color change and it got soft. But because they had just given me so much time for this to happen, this like dry root, it looks like almost a witch's hand when you first see it. It's all, you know, like something with like arthritic, but it actually bloomed with flowers and leaves. So anyway, I wanted to share this passage with you. Sometimes I teach this to my, you know, 19-year-old male students, and it's, you know, I think it's kind of far from their experience, but I tell them, you know, someday you may be the partner of someone who experiences this, and you may come back to this. Again, whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, it's talking about a human experience in a human way. And so I've had some, you know, they write essays for me about it, and I've been amazed at the profundity of what they actually reflect upon in this passage. So, so some of you are even younger than 19, but This is what we called yesterday the tanzil, where you receive something and then the ta'wil, the deeper interpretation and the understanding, is something that happens over a lifetime through the many, many experiences that you have that allow you to filter this and understand it more deeply. So, yeah, Mary, how did I do? I took a long time.
No worries. Okay, thank you, Simi. You've touched upon an aspect of this text that is almost opaque to me, I must admit. And that piece that you just read,
Yeah.
something that you had written a while ago, Sumayya's got to read that. I'm sure she's going to like it. So I'm going to now talk about, after this profound story that Simi has shared with you and the beauty of her narration, I'm going to come back to some cut and dry discussion. And I'm going to talk about the larger context in which this story appears and the kind of conclusions that are drawn at the end. So after one of the things that I like to point out here is that, and this has to do with Muslim theology, a good number of Muslims believe that Jesus did not die, was not crucified, and did not die, and he was raised to the heavens alive, and he shall return at the end of times. But this surah is one of those places in Quran that suggests otherwise, and I'll share with you that aspect because I thought this is a place where that discussion is relevant, so I thought I would touch upon that. So this surah basically, one of the contemporary commentators points out, Javed Ghamidi, he's a commentator of Quran from Pakistan, and he points out that on two occasions, when John is born, the angel says, Salamun alayhi yawma wulida wa yawma yamutu wa yawma yub'athu hayya. Salam be on him the day he was born, and the day he shall die, and the day he shall be brought back to life, the day of judgment. Salam be on him on all three occasions. And then when Jesus is born and he speaks while he's still a baby, he says, Salam be on me the day I'm born, the day I shall die, and the day I shall be brought back to life. So Ghamidi points out that the surah maintains the same cycle of life, death, and life for both John and Jesus. So he says this is one of the reasons that makes him think it is unreasonable to think, and by the way, let's not forget that Quran does not at all suggest that Jesus is coming for the second time. Quran, this suggestion is totally absent from Quran, even though it is there in Muslim theology, and a lot of believers think like that. And apart from that, the two other occasions that are relevant here and that are relevant to this discussion, in the third surah, and I didn't touch upon that at that point because I thought this is a more relevant occasion to talk about this. In the third surah, in 55th ayah, God tells Jesus when he has been betrayed and some people are about to attack him, God tells Jesus, Inni mutawaffika wa rafi'uka ilayya. And that normally means I'll cause you to die and will raise you to myself. So this is what God says to Jesus. But then this word mutawaffika, I'll cause you to die, is not allowed to I mean, I'm being critical here, is not allowed to speak for itself, and Muslim uh, thinkers or believers who like to think otherwise, they would interpret the word in other ways, that God is recalling Jesus from his mission and not causing him to die, even though ordinarily this is what it means. Mutawafika means I'll cause you to die. And so that is another occasion where it is suggested that Jesus was actually, God caused him to die before he would be seized by his opponents and enemies. On still another occasion, and this is, all of these have been pointed out by Ghamidi, so I must refer to him as I do it. In the 5th surah, that is Al-Ma'idah, in 116 and 117, God depicts the Day of Judgment, and he's going to ask Jesus on the Day of Judgment, did you tell your people to worship you and your mother besides me? Jesus is asking God on the Day of Judgment, did you tell your people to worship yourself and your mother besides me? And Jesus says, you're above and beyond such a thing, my Lord. How could I say such a thing? I have not attributed anything to you other than the truth. I only invited these people to worship you, who is my Rabb as well as theirs. So I only invited them to worship the one and only God, who is my Rabb as much as theirs. And then Jesus says that so long as I was among them, this is what I told them and this is what they were doing. So after I passed away, I don't know what they've been doing, and you are better aware of that. So hold me not accountable for what they've been doing behind me. So Ghamidi points out that this depiction of the Day of Judgment suggests that Jesus is ignorant on the Day of Judgment, that people ascribed divinity to him after he died. And he's going to tell God that I didn't say anything of this sort, and if they have come up with this idea, you know that better after I passed away. So Jesus is completely unaware. And Ghamidi points out that if Jesus were going to come for a second time, he would learn about the notions of divinity surrounding him. And on the Day of Judgment, he would not sound unaware before God that I don't know about this. He would say, the second time I went, I corrected them. And I think this is a very reasonable argument. Quran is depicting the Day of Judgment and tells us that Jesus doesn't know what was going on behind him. And on the Day of Judgment, he says, I don't know what they were doing behind me. So if he were coming for a second time, Ghamidi points out, he would say to God, the second time I went to the planet, I tried to correct them. So, but this is not what he says. He's completely unaware. So I think these things put together look like a very conclusive argument to me, that we hardly have any reason to believe that Jesus is coming back for the second time. And most likely, and Quran does not point at any such thing. If anything, if you look at these things that I've just shared with you, Quran is suggesting otherwise. And I feel that this idea has creeped into Muslim theology from Christian thought. It is not exactly an indigenous Islamic idea. So that was one thing that I thought was relevant, and I thought I would touch upon that. Now, the passage from 16 to 40 that Simi has talked about, it concludes at these three verses, 34 to 36. 34 to 36 is towards the conclusion of this passage, and it says, that was Jesus. The story has just been told. It does not befit God to take a son. When he decides to do something, he says, be, and it is. This is how things are for him. So implicit here is the idea that the miraculous birth of Jesus should not lead people into ascribing God a son. This is part of God's creative ability, and it shouldn't be a surprise. It does not befit God to take a son. When he decides to do something, he says, be, and it is. So the birth of Jesus is not a surprise. It shouldn't be such a surprise for people. And then 36 goes on to tell us, Jesus taught to his followers, God is my Rabb as well as yours. So worship him alone, and that is the straight path. So this is basically the conclusion of this passage. And immediately after that, we have an account of some other messengers. So 41 to 50, and mention Abraham in Kitab. Muhammad is told, mention Abraham in Kitab, and then the account of his struggle with his father and how he renounced false gods and the idolatry that his father and his people were engaged in, and how he was blessed with Isaac and Jacob. And Jacob is also called Israel. And then comes an account of Moses and Aaron. And then comes the account of, so Moses, Aaron, Isaac, Jacob together, they represent the Israelite line. And then a mention of Ishmael, who is the ancestor of Muhammad. And then a mention of Idris. And the long passage that had begun with an account of Zechariah and John concludes, these are people whom God blessed and guided. And an interesting thing is being said here. After each of them came generations who missed their prayers and followed their desires. And this, from a Quranic point of view, this is one of those occasions where Quran points out how human beings come to differ in their religious views, how religion departs from the original path that a prophet teaches. So after each of them came generations who missed their prayers and followed their desires. And here again I noticed a very interesting connection, missing the prayers and following desires. And Quran talks about this a lot. This is an important theme that appears in Quran again and again. Not to allow ourselves to be carried away by, to get carried by the life of this world, not to have an indulgent lifestyle, to refrain, to basically not live a life of indulgence. And what exactly is wrong with that? What exactly is wrong with an indulgent lifestyle? What exactly is wrong with pursuing your desires endlessly? The issue is, as Quran points out, that this directly competes with our remembrance of God. As Quran says, Inna salata tanha anil fahsha'i wal munkar. Prayers keep you from the shameful and disapproved things. And just like that, if you indulge in shameful and disapproved things, they keep you from your prayers. They compete with each other. So either there is remembrance of God or there is oblivion. So if you remember God, then those things tend to diminish. And if those things are the overwhelming feature of your life, then remembrance of God goes away. So they pursued their desires, started missing their prayers, and that is where they left the path that the prophets had taught them. And now, I'm not going to talk about Taha, so we'll just talk about this surah, looking at the discussion and the importance of things that are being discussed here. So now, after this, from 66 onwards until the end of this surah, there are some lessons that are being presented. So from 66 to 72, God notes yet again, in a slightly different manner, that human beings doubt the possibility of an afterlife. They ask, how will I be brought back to life after I've died? They doubt the possibility of the day of judgment and the possibility of accountability. And the response is, Quran responds back by saying, do they not consider that we created them even though they did not exist? Do they not consider that they did not exist and their beginnings are as small as a cell that only contained the genetic information that was needed to bring them to life? And there comes a whole human being capable of so many things. And that God who has such creative ability, do people doubt his creative ability? That he would not be able to bring the dead back to life and repeat the act of creation? Why should that be surprising? That is the response there. From 73 to 80 and 81 to 96 is something very much interconnected, and I thought that is why I highlighted them in red. And we have seen this just yesterday, and this is something interesting, that these surah, the pairs of surahs that we talk about, sometimes repeat the same themes. So we saw this theme yesterday when we talked about those two people. One of them had two gardens, and the guy with two gardens, he was so full of his resources, and he thought he had it all, and his resources were never going to fail him, and he was, as a result, in pursuit of the life of this world, he started neglecting God, and he's unmindful of God, and he doesn't realize the fleeting nature of his resources and how they could fail him. And then God tells us that you're coming back to me all alone, stripped of your resources. Those resources that you were so full of that you thought were never going to fail you. You have come all alone by yourself without those resources. Those resources that made you unmindful of God, that disconnected you from God. You were thinking about them all the time. And they had become your virtual God. That is what you ended up worshiping. So you come back to God all alone. And then right after that, there was this other point made, that those false gods, those deities that you conceived in creation, whose intercession you hoped for, whom you thought were going to help you on the day of judgment, now they're not there either to help you. So those false deities and your preoccupation with those false gods that kept you from responding to the Prophet's mission and to God's word, they're no longer there. You're all by yourself. No resources that you took pride in, and no false intercessors, no false gods there to intercede for you. We saw that yesterday, and here again 73 to 96 is doing that same thing again. 73 to 80 is pointing out that the social and economic status that certain people enjoy, that deludes them, and that gives them a false sense of fulfillment, and they become unmindful of God. And the day of judgment, God is going to tell them that you have come to us all by yourself, just as we created you alone, stripped of your resources. And 81 to 96 talks about people's preoccupation with false deities, which keeps them from responding to God's word, which keeps them from orienting themselves to God the Creator. And again, the same thing is emphasized. On the day of judgment, God is going to tell you, where are those partners that you used to assign to me? Where are those false gods whose intercession you hoped for? And all of those things will have vanished away from these people. So I thought those were, honestly for me, this is very profound and powerful. This strikes me. And not just that, I'm actually reminded that in 73 to 80, or maybe in the next surah, I'm forgetting the exact location. So it's not just the wealth, and it's not just our preoccupation with false gods and idols in our cultures, but also our offspring, our families that are mentioned here. That there were these people that you were so fond of, and because of them, you would compromise on some of those things that God expected from you. And where are they now? So that was the third thing mentioned here. This is what this surah adds on to what we saw yesterday. Family and bonds that keep us sometimes from responding to God's word, responding to the truth. And with that, the surah concludes. Thank you very much. So now we can have some questions, some thoughts that you would like to share.
How much should we read for tomorrow?